Are you interested in some spicy new deck tech? Well, here's your host, Capital G!
And peoples of the world, welcome back. Capital G bringing you a deck tech for the Raven Man. My cat over here, Medallion, is here to help us out with this one. It's gonna be a fun deck for us to pilot, not necessarily fun for our opponents to pilot. But before we get into the deck, of course, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel. Not just my own deck techs, but I also feature decks from the community as well. I'll be doing my next round of community decks shortly. Gonna do a few Dominaria United decks first. And, oh yeah, that's all the socials, of course. All the Discord links are in the description below. Discords that I'm part of are free to join and free to play. And you might find me on Discord, usually Pacific weekday mornings. You might catch me. So be sure to come join the Discord groups and let's play some Commander. And what a commander we have picked today, the Raven Man, recently revealed to be the Necromancer Lim-Dul. 2 mana for this 2/1 human wizard, and at the beginning of each end step, that's every end step, yours and your opponent's, if a player discarded a card this turn, any player, create a 1/1 blackbird creature token with flying, and this creature cannot block. Also has an activated ability, 4 mana. Tap this, each opponent discards a card, but we can only activate this at sorcery speed. So, what I've noticed with this, one, we can discard cards too. We can cycle cards, we can discard our own cards to pay costs, those sort of things. So, this deck is going to feature a cycling sub-theme. There is going to be some typical cards that you find when we force our opponents to discard cards here. So that's kind of the strategy. It's a mix of taking resources away from our opponents while cycling away some of our cards in order to get maximum value and make sure we get spit out a bird every turn. Those birds cannot block, so they're going to be a source of offense for us, or they could be some resources we can sacrifice. These are the concepts for the Raven Man. Go through our artifact suite to kick things off. As usual, the Arcane Signet, Bag of Holding. That's whenever we discard a card, we get to exile that card from our graveyard. Also, activate ability, 2 tap, draw, then discard a card. So it gives us a discard outlet that we can activate on our opponent's turn. So if they're not discarding cards from any other effects, we can discard our own, get the card back, and get our bird. 4 mana tap and sack the Bag of Holding for us to get all of those cards exiled with this thing back to our hand. Charcoal Diamond, and just battlefield tap gives us some mana. Running the Fluctuator, I think I've got enough cycling cards to justify running this excellent cost reducer. Cycling abilities, we activate cost up to 2 less, so we cycle a card every turn, get our Raven, such as the plan. Heraldic Banner, we're going to choose black and make our birds a little more offensive. Key to the City, so we can do some shenanigans with this. So we can tap this to discard one of our cards to make sure a creature cannot be blocked this turn. Oh wait, that means we get a Raven at the end of that turn. And whenever Key to the City becomes untapped, we can pay 2 mana to draw a card. So it can get us some cards back as well. Pretty sweet stuff. The idea, of course, is when one of our opponents attacks another, we can activate the Key to the City and get the value that way, as well as some damage through to our opponents. Mind Stone, Skull Clamp. Our Ravens have 1 toughness. Throw a Skull Clamp on there and refill our hand. Soul Ring. Sword of the Meek. This is something that we can discard and just kind of get back. Not running any specific combos, although this would be a good place to run a combo. If you have any way of sacrificing the Sword of the Meek for value, such as KCI, Karkine Ironworks. Sword of the Prawns. As long as the equipped creature is tapped creatures we control get +2/+0. The idea is to throw this onto our commander, force a discard, and then our Ravens are swinging in for buff. Also, as long as the equipped creature is untapped, our untapped creatures get +0/+2. Not too worried about that second line. If we're flooded on mana, we can actually use this to activate our commander multiple times and really take the resources away from our opponents. And Thran Dynamo. Why Thran Dynamo? Because it costs 3 generic and a black to activate our commander. So with Thran Dynamo, it makes it a lot easier to not only cast our top end spells, but also to activate our commander's abilities. Over to creatures, Archfiend of Ifnir. Again, we've got the cycling sub-theme, so this is a card that we prefer to cast rather than cycle. If we do get the opportunity to cast it, it's going to devastate our opponent's boards. The Asylum Visitor. Beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, we draw a card and lose a life. So, if we end up hitting a lot of our discard things early and taking all of the cards out of our opponent's hands, well, this is just going to give us so much value. Big Game Hunter. Great piece of removal here, especially if you manage to discard this to say Bag of Holding and be able to cast it for the 1 black. Destroy a creature of power 4 or greater. Bone Miser. So whenever we discard a creature card, we get a zombie. Whenever we discard a land, we get to add 2 mana to our mana pool, and whenever we discard a non-creature, non-land, we get to draw a card. So again, this so nicely tucks in with our cycling synergies. Burglar Rat, forcing our opponents to discard a card. Disciple of Malice has protection from white, so it can block against that color effectively. Also cycles away on the cheap. Running the Grey Merchant here is a way to get some offense in, drain our opponents a little bit. Hollow One. So a couple options with Hollow One. It can be a 4/4 that costs us 3, 1, or even 0 mana depending on what's happening on the turn. Or we can just cycle this away. Either way, a great addition here. Horror of the Broken Lands. Whenever we cycle or discard another card, this gets +2/+1 until end of turn, so great piece of offense once it's down. The OG, Lim-Dul the Necromancer. This is here for pure flavor, since we know that the Raven Man is Lim-Dul. Lurching, a Rot Beast. Cycles away for a single black. Mosaic Mummy says, each player discards a card with their ETBs. Sure. I don't mind discarding cards, especially if they have Madness. Moaning Wall. We can just, it's a 0/2 defender, but we can cycle it away if we don't want it. Plague Crafter. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Those that can't discards a card. So, great piece of removal. Great source of discard if we need it that way too. Running Rankle. So it's got the flying, it's got the haste. We all love this Eldraine fairy thingamabobby. At least I think we do. Anyways, each player discards a card when this attacks. That's exactly why we're running it. We're going to use that every time. Each player loses 1 life and draws a card. Sometimes each player sacrifices a creature. Sometimes. Sadistic Hypnotist. On our turn, we can sack off a creature to force a player to discard 2 cards. Really take someone out of the game if we need to. Especially with our Ravens. We'll have creatures to sacrifice. The Scion of Darkness. It's 8 mana to cast. It's a bit of a beast. Only a 6/6, so a little underpowered in that regard. But whenever this deals combat damage to a player, we can put a creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. We're forcing our opponents to discard all the time. We'll have some good things to bring back with this. It also cycles away for a reasonable 3 mana, so sure thing. Shadowgrange Archfiend. If we manage to discard this, we can pay 3 mana and 8 life to drop an 8/4 onto the battlefield. That is fantastic. Otherwise it's a really high 7 mana to cast. So hopefully we can madness this in, and when we do, we get to force our opponents to sacrifice their most powerful creatures. Running the new Shieldred here. Whenever we draw a card, especially through our cycling, we gain life. Whenever our opponents draw a card, they lose 2 life. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's going to be one of the top cards of this set, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is like the $20, $30 card off the hop, so hopefully you pull this in your packs. Street Wraith. It has Swamp Walk, and we can pay 2 life to cycle it, so this is always a free cycle. Tiny Bones. Remember Tiny Bones? Everyone loved this adorable little skeleton. It says at the beginning of each end step that's yours and your opponent's. If an opponent discarded a card, you draw a card and lose a life. And then we can double a bunch of mana of this. Each opponent with no cards in hand loses 10 life. So this can help us towards the end game later on. Twisted Abomination. Swamp Cycling. So this lets us go get a swamp. Undead Gladiator. I like this guy because we can cycle it away and then it gives us a discard outlet. So for 2 mana we cycle this, and then for 2 mana we can discard a card to bring this back to our hand. We can only do this during the upkeep, that's fine. It's a funky way of giving all of our cards cycling. And the Wasteland Scorpion. It's a 2/2 if Death Touch. We can cast it if we need that kind of block. Or we can just cycle it away, depending on what the situation calls for. Enchantments, running the Bad Moon here to help buff up our Ravens and go on the attack with them. Braid's Frightful Return. I thought this was cool. We could sacrifice a creature, ideally a Raven, and if we do, each opponent discards a card. Great Chapter 1. Chapter 2, return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Yes, please. And Chapter 3, each opponent may sacrifice a non-land, non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life and we draw a card. So we could get some either some card draw, or we can get some permanents off the board with Chapter 3, which I like. Only 3 mana for all 3 of these effects. It's got read ahead. We can choose to skip to chapters 2 or 3 rather than just go ahead with Chapter 1, but I think on this occasion I want all 3 chapters, so Braid's Frightful Return makes the cut. Faith of the Devoted. Whenever we cycle or discard a card, we can pay an additional mana to have each of our opponents lose 2 life and we gain 2 life. Gibbering Descent. 6 mana for this enchantment. We could madness it in for 4 if we get lucky. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses a life and discards a card. That includes us. But if we have no cards in hand for whatever reason, we get to skip our upkeep step. That means that we don't take the damage, whereas our opponents, if they run out of cards, they would still lose that life. Regardless, this is just an easy way to sit on the table. Everyone has to discard a card every turn. We get a Raven every turn. Such is the idea here. Of course, because we're running the discard theme, we're going to be running things like Liliana's Caress, so punishing our opponents for discarding cards. The OG version of this, Megrum. Oppression, another enchantment that basically forces our opponents to discard cards. In this case, whenever they play a spell, they must discard a card from their hand. Phyrexian Reclamation. Let's get some of our creatures back to our hand. Yes, we have to pay a little bit of life to do it, but that's okay because we're cycling away some creatures, then bringing it back to our hand. That's pure value. Raider's Wake. Again, another enchantment that punishes our opponents for discarding cards. And Waste Not. This awards us for our opponents discarding cards. Whenever an opponent discards a creature, we get a zombie. When they discard a land, we get mana. And whenever they discard a non-creature, non-land, we get to draw a card. Moving on to instants and sorceries. We're going to start with Defile. We're running mono black, so Defile is probably going to minus out whatever creature we target this with. Easy Prey. It cycles away, or can pop a smaller creature, like say a Zulaport Cutthroat. Fade from Memory. It can exile a card from a graveyard, or we can cycle it away for the single black. Liliana's Triumph, forcing all our opponents to sacrifice a creature. If we control a Liliana Planeswalker, each opponent also discards a card. We are running 2 of them. I'll get back to you on that. Malakir Rebirth. If someone wants to target our commander and take it off the board, this could protect it. Of course, if we draw this early game and we need the land, we can always play it as a Malakir Mire instead. Scarab Feast. Exile to 3 cards per single graveyard. Someone else running a graveyard strategy, and we don't want them to reanimate things. All this will take 3 creatures out of their graveyard for good. Soul Shatter, another way to force our opponents to sacrifice their best creatures or planeswalkers. Swat, destroy target creature of power 2 or less. This was a bit of a standard staple back in the day. And without weakness, target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn, or we can cycle it away. Our sorceries include Damnation, of course, to destroy all creatures. Sometimes we just need that reset. Fate Swarm. It pops a creature or an enchantment in mono black, which is great. Grim Tutor to go get the best card that the board state calls for. Razakev's Right. So we could pay 1 mana to cycle this away, or we could pay 5 to go Tutor. So this gives us some options, at least. It's very expensive for a Tutor, but at least it gives us that cycling option. That's what makes it pretty decent. Rise of the Dark Realms. We're filling up everybody's graveyards, so if we get the chance to cast this, chances are it's lights out. Siphon Mind forces all our opponents to discard cards and draws us a card for each card discarded this way. Unburden, we can take out cards from somebody's hand, or we can cycle this away. And a Wander in Depth lets us bring 2 creature cards back from our graveyard to our hand, or we can cycle it away depending on what the situation calls for. Our Planeswalkers will be Liliana of the Veil, getting the reprint here in Dominaria United. I'm almost tempted to call it New Phyrexia, but Dominaria United is what we're going to go with for now. And this is a great reprint. Each player discards a card with that +1. That is amazing. The -2, target player sacrifices a creature. Well, because we're taking resources away from people's hands, they're going to have to commit to the board. And when they do, well, we're going to make them sack them off. Don't worry about the -6. I'd be shocked if we ever get to -6 in this deck. The other Liliana we choose to go with is Wake of the Dead. Because again, that +1, each player discards a card. Each opponent who can't loses 3 life. Can't mean, well, just that. They're already out of cards. And the -3 also takes something off the board. Depending on the number of cards in our graveyard, we're going to have a lot too. So, 2 great versions of Liliana to build this one with. Over to mana, let's talk about Ash Barrens. Basic land cycling. Triggers our cycling thing, so of course we're going to run this. Baron Moor. Blasted Landscape, we could cycle this away as well. If we need to play it as a land, it comes in untapped, which is pretty sweet. The Cabal Stronghold, this combined with the 21 swamps we have. Honestly, we need at least 5 swamps in play in order to get Cabal Stronghold. 5 basic swamps, I have to say, to get this to be a mana positive card. But still, there's no real consequence to running it otherwise. Darksteel Citadel. Desert of the Glorified. We can cycle this away. Drownyard Temple, if we ever discard this, we can always pay 3 mana and bring this back to the battlefield. Grottery Sanitarium, each player draws then discards a card. Any speed we like, any time we like, for 2 mana. Polluted Mire cycles away easy. As I've mentioned, 21 of these swamps. A Temple of the False God. Treasure Vault. Double X tap this and create X treasure tokens. The Unholy Grotto. Tap to add 1 to our mana pool, and black to put a zombie card from our graveyard on top of our library. We do have a couple of zombies that cycle, so I thought this was a nice little synergy to toss in. Again, comes into play untapped and ready to go, so there's no real opportunity cost. And Vault of Whispers. I forget why I put the artifact lens in here. I feel like there was an artifact synergy in the deck while I was building it, so it's quite possible that we could swap out the artifact lens for additional swamps, in fact. So that just might be a holdover from the building process. But still gives us a total of 34 lands, 35 with the MDFC Malakir Rebirth. And that is the Raven Man. Hope you all enjoyed this particular build. Hopefully it's a little more fun than the typical discard everything deck. Yes, the elephant in the room, no Turgid. Turgid is not fun to play against, so I decided not to be that jerk. Didn't put Gisa in either. The Midnight Hunt Gisa would also be an excellent addition here. Chose not to run them because they're kind of obvious. But it also depends if you want to focus more on the discard synergy or if you want to focus more on the cycling. Those are both very valid routes to take in order to generate your army of ravens and just flock on in. With that in mind, I will be back next time. Enjoy pre-release weekend, and bye for now.